The book is called 000 from Roberto Saviano. Kind of dissects the cocaine trade. But one of the things that stuck with me the most about that book was not necessarily the description of violent cartels. What stuck with me the most was his analysis of cocaine as an exceptional drug. Exceptional in the sense that not the norm, whereas cocaine is actually an exception to that. Cocaine makes you more productive. It actually bumps up. And it doesn't really matter if by doing that, it consumes the individual who is consuming.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Shipping Excellence Podcast. I'm Andrew Duncan, and today I have with me here Sergio Visinoni, who is a solopreneur in the tech space. Welcome, Sergio.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm very glad to be here.
Glad to have you. So, before we dive in, I want to just quickly, talk about this article that you wrote recently. Can you tell us, just the title and the quick synopsis?
Yeah, so I have my own newsletter called Pseudo Make Me a CTO. It's one of the things I do, which is advising people on how to become better engineering leaders. And I recently published an article whose title is a bit provocative, Is GenAI Digital Cocaine? And the kind of quick summary of the article is that I make an actual parallel between cocaine or the role it plays in today's society and what we're starting to see with GenAI usage, especially chatbots and chat tools.
Yeah, that's I'm interested to talk about that a little bit. So, how'd you get into writing this article, getting into tech? What do you do? Can you give us a little bit about your background?
Absolutely, yes. So, as you said, I'm a solopreneur, which sounds very fancy. Let me make it a bit more concrete. I've been in the tech industry for more than 20 years. Started off as software engineer, then grew up into various leadership roles as VP of engineering, CTOs. I've been working with corporate type of environments, scale up startups, bit of everything, right? Small teams, big teams. And then end of 2023, I decided, I wanted to do something different. I decided to take the road of becoming my own boss for many reasons. We can get into that if you want to know more. But basically, since January 2024, I'm my own boss and I run different types of activities. There's part of it which is B2B advisory and consulting. So I have a fractional CTO role for a company. I'm doing advisory in a different capacity for another company, and then do ad hoc collaboration, sometimes due diligence and whatnot. I also practice my own activity as a coach and mentor for individual engineering leaders. So I work with a dozen people who need recurring support on how to become better engineering leaders. I also launched recently a community where actually various engineering leaders meet with me every other week, bi-monthly sessions where we go deep into a specific topic that might be relevant for them. And I just recently also launched a SaaS tool for CTOs, which I'm kind of testing. It's very early stage. Besides that, I also write my newsletter. So my newsletter is one of the creative outlets for me. I really enjoy writing because writing helps me to reflect more about what I've been learning in the past, but also what I'm observing in today's world. I have this newsletter called Pseudo Make Me a CTO, and I publish every week. I try to stick to every week. Then when I'm on holidays, I'm also kind of suspending a little bit. But that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, you covered a lot. That's really interesting, and I want to know more about that SaaS tool that you launched, because that's the world that I live in. I love helping companies build and launch their tools that way. So, but before we do that, I want to dive into the article. So, is GenAI digital cocaine? How do you draw that parallel? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I'm gonna summarize the article because it actually started off with a personal experience, right? Most of what I write, it starts with a personal experience and then it expands into reflection and then finding other sources. And the personal experience is probably something many of the listeners can relate to. I was working on a client's project with an analytics tool, it's Amplitude. The tool doesn't really matter. I was working setting up some Amplitude dashboards for one of my clients because we're approaching the launch of a product. And at some point I was trying to do something that was not necessarily covered in the basic use cases. And I noticed there was an AI assistant tool in Amplitude that's supposed to help you kind of build complex dashboards. So I spent probably half an hour iterating on different prompts, trying to get the tool to suggest me the right way to solve the problem. The worst thing is that the tool was giving me wrong suggestions, literally things that were not supported in the tool itself. So actually, it's things that were not in the documentation. after being frustrated for about half an hour, I decided to, you know what, I'm gonna read the documentation myself and then finding the solution the hard way. 20 minutes later, I had the solution working because just by reading the documentation, I found a reasonably easy way to solve my own problem. That was in itself very uneventful, but at the same time, a few days later, I saw a post from Kent Beck, someone who I follow very closely, who was reporting a similar experience using GenAI tools to do some programming, and I realized that he was not learning anything. He was just kind of being the dumb operator and trying to follow brute force way stupid instructions. That's what really led me down this reflection on figuring out what is happening in our mind when we start relying a bit too much on GenAI tools, specifically chatbots, right? Tools, interactive tools that are supposed to give us shortcuts on solving problems that otherwise we would solve by using our own habit, right? Our own brains. I started reading a lot online about recent researches and studies on the effect on cognitive abilities caused by over-reliance on GenAI tools. And then I had a moment of illumination, let's call it this way, where that's where the title of the article came from, because I was thinking about a book I read a decade ago from an Italian author. I'm Italian myself. I read a lot of Italian authors. The book is called 000 from Roberto Saviano. It kind of dissects the cocaine trade worldwide. But one of the things that stuck with me the most about that book was not necessarily the description of violent cartels in Mexico, or like collusion with the CIA in the US or whatever. What stuck with me the most was his analysis of cocaine as an exceptional drug, exceptional in the sense that not the norm. Typically, we associate social stigma with drug usage because most drugs make you dumber, therefore less productive, therefore less useful to society. Whereas cocaine is actually an exception to that. Cocaine makes you more productive. You can work long hours. You can, you feel more energized. It actually bumps up, it pumps up your ability to get stuff done. And in that sense, Saviano was calling cocaine the systems drug because it's the drug that is very much aligned with the incentives in the capitalistic system. So it makes people more productive, and it doesn't really matter if by doing that it consumes the individual who is consuming the drug, right? Because over time, we all know the long-term effects of using cocaine are not nice, are quite bad for health. But from a system perspective, the individual becomes expendable as long as they produce whatever the system needs to be produced. And I realized, hey, this is very similar to what might be going on with GenAI tools. We're basically being incentivized to use them because they make us more quote unquote productive, even though my personal experience kind of disagree with that. But the main selling point is they will make you more productive. And we're starting to see that there are some interesting side effects in terms of cognitive abilities, because guess what? Your brain is a muscle. If you don't use it, it will atrophy, right? Like muscles. If you don't move, your muscles will atrophy. We're only starting to see the first research on this because typically these are long-term effects. And I kind of worried about it. So I didn't want to sound too alarmistic. That's why the title is a question. The question is GenAI digital cocaine? I'm not saying it is, but it might be, right? And I think it's important that we are very cautious about basically not being too enthusiastic about something until we fully understand the broader implications that using it or abusing it might have.
So I think that is an interesting parallel. One would argue, and studies have shown now, that social media, too much social media addiction, is harmful for your health. And so you're essentially comparing the advent of LLMs and generative AI and the rapid adoption potentially having the same harmful side effects as social media.
Yeah, exactly. The key word here is potential, right? So I'm not here saying don't use it, it's bad. I'm saying let's be careful, right? And you mentioned social media, and it's actually a very good parallel because, as you said, now we have plenty of evidence of the fact that over-reliance or other overexposure to social media can have massive negative side effects, especially in young people, by young generations. Right now, what I don't know if you know what is happening in Australia, but they are trying to ban social medias for people who are younger than 16 years old. And I'm a follower of Cal Newport. Cal Newport is a writer in the tech productivity space. So he's a computer scientist who writes a lot about productivity, but he writes a lot about the implications of technology in society as well. And he has this interesting parallel saying what is happening with social media today is akin to what happened with smoking cigarettes a few decades ago. So it used to be cool, and then we realized, you know what, maybe it's not a good idea if our teenagers are smoking. And something similar is happening with social media, right? Where we're starting to see that, especially a young female can develop a lot of psychological troubles by using too much social media, but also they make us unproductive. So maybe the major distinction between social media and LLMs or GenAI is the fact that social medias were never really a tool to make you more productive at work, even though many people started using social media as a form of work, right? But they kind of tended to interfere with your day-to-day job, right? How many people are distracted during their work because they are jumping on social media? So there's inherent potential negative effect of social media in the short term. That's why, the incentives there are a bit less aligned than what I'm seeing with LLMs. With LLMs, they promise you to be more productive at work, right? Who doesn't want that? Especially, if you then make a parallel with what is going on at the macro economic level or geopolitical level today. I don't want to get into a debate about Doge and Musk and Trump, but the writings are on the wall. There's a certain narrative that is becoming dominant in one of the most influential countries in the world, which kind of reinforces this idea that we just need to squeeze more productivity out of people because that's the ultimate goal. I kind of disagree with that, honestly, right? So I don't think that's the ultimate goal, but it might be beyond the scope of this podcast. But that's why I'm saying let's figure out what Gen AI can be helpful for in the broader perspective of humanity, not just making you more productive in the short term and making someone rich in Silicon Valley.
Well, a lot of people do use social media, right? Did get started in social media for work, but I think the biggest consumer of social media these days, or I guess the ones that we're most concerned about, are the younger generations coming up, right? And so there's not a expected productivity gain out of social media there, where we do know that the studies show that overexposure to it is detrimental to your mental health. With Gen AI, the whole premise behind it is it's more productive. And we've seen people use it in different ways. We've seen them try to bond or form relationships or have a companion. And, I think there's a world where that happens. It's, a lot of why people are drawn to social media. But I think this is the first time where we've seen it be not only touted as the tool that significantly increases your productivity, but people are actually seeing that in the workplace. So I think there's value in being conscious of the long-term psychological, and economical impacts that tool like Gen AI provides or exposes us to. There's probably a curve of there'll be some change, especially a period of change in the short to near term where the economy shifts. I think this is one article I wrote, that the economy shifts because what we value as a society changes, right? Knowledge work is big right now. But I also think, on that curve somewhere is also an increase in productivity. And it's kind of like when wheat was domesticated, right? And then we could plant wheat, and we went from like a hunter-gatherer society to a agricultural society, right? Like we didn't see what the negative effects of that would be, but we only saw the positive. And I think, so what you're saying is we should be wary of kind of making that mistake again in history. The other side of that argument is, yeah, there were some negative effects of domestication of wheat, but also for like a species, there were large benefits to it that probably outweighed the short-term negative. So I'm curious how long you think. I think it'll take, like a decade, 2 decades before we start really seeing it. But I think it's a pretty far horizon, assuming we don't reach AGI in that period, and quantum computing doesn't become a mainstream thing.
Yeah, so I'm generally wary of getting into predictions because they tend to be, just intellectual leisure. Let's put it this way. It's very difficult to predict what's going to happen in the future, and there's no point in trying to make that happen. But yeah, if we learn from the past, it's probably going to take 1 or 2 generations to fully understand the implications of what is happening right now. And as you say, there are positive implications and side effects. But when we look at humans' history, which has been basically dominated by the capitalistic system, I'm not saying capitalistic system is bad inherently, but it's based on certain incentives. Those incentives are, if you increase production, increase wealth, that's the only thing that matters. All right, GDP as the main indicator of whether a country is doing well or not. It's a bit narrow, but it's aligned with the kind of the primitives of the system, right? One, probably the biggest side effect of that entire system is the fact that we are not just consuming the brains of individuals, we are consuming the environment that is supposed to support our life in the next generations, right? And though the problem is becoming bigger, we're not necessarily seeing an increase in effort put in the direction of solving that problem. It's actually the opposite, right? So who knows? The problem here is whenever you have incentives that are misaligned in terms of what's good for the community and what's good for the individual. And this is a typical case of the tragedy of the commons type of situation, right? Where everybody can benefit from a common source, but then everybody will be negatively affected by the common good becoming unavailable in the future. So overfishing, overhunting, over polluting, these are all tragedy of the commons type of situations. And here the funny thing, and I don't want to sound too much of a radical person, but I like to think about this, right? I'm not a Luddite, I'm a technologist. My life has been in technology, right? I see the importance and the value of this. I'm just wary when I hear too much enthusiasm, especially when it's coming from the people who tend to make a lot of money out of people buying their services. Right? Of course, everybody's talking about AGI in the tech bro space where they're selling you AGI, right? So I'm not surprised about that, but we need to look beyond just that small group of people and try to understand what should be the main focus for humanity in the next decades. Yeah, AI might be one. I'm not sure it's the most important, especially when you look at another interesting side effects of the rise of AI, which is environmental impact of that. Right, companies such as Microsoft and Google. I wrote another article a few months ago about the environmental side effects of it, and even though you cannot say AI is driving the major growth in CO2 emissions, the problem is that it's not helping because it's increasing massively the amount of energy required, and we're already struggling to meet the Paris target to a certain amount of renewable energies by the target if kind of the postcode keeps getting farther away from us. Thanks also to GenAI and the fact that it's kind of causing a boom in installations of new data centers. Energy consumption is exploding. There are research to say, a single ChatGPT interaction consumes, a certain amount of water just to cool down the data center. So when you start looking at all this data and the fact that there's not really yet a clear measure of the increasing productivity, then I'm just cautious. The term to define myself is probably very cautious and try to be very sober when evaluating these new technologies.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting relationship between the advancement of technology and society and the benefits that that bring with what is the cost of that, right? And so it's like, is it the cost of doing business? Should we be more mindful of the impacts? And then what does that affect? Is that the speed at which we make them? Is it the manner in which we make them? Are some advances not available because there is a line that we as a society have collectively agreed not to cross? So I think that that debate sort of war wages on and will for for eternity as we as a species attempt to travel space and understand quantum computing. And something you said was interesting, and that is it's difficult to predict the future, and we don't know if AI, the advent of AI, is the most significant advancement we'll see in our lifetime, right? Or even the next generation, because it may not be, very well may not be. Because if you just think about generations ago, there's a lot of technical advances that have happened there on a much slower timeline that were very significant for that time period and set the stage for who we could become today. And we don't know if AI is of mild significance or if it is the major event yet. And I think, like you said, can't predict the future. We'll just have to live on and see. It'll take generations, right? But I thought that was really interesting. And I think, that tug and pull, or that war that's going on between the advancements of the species and social awareness. I think that's another one that will wax and wane as time goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, who knows what's going to happen? The good thing is that we're living very exciting times, even more exciting this year than last year, if I may. But yeah, again, my main message, as usual, be vigilant and try to come up with your own understanding of the word. Just don't take at face value short tweets. Like, I hate tweets because they are shallow by design, and actually think that long form articles and journalism are still very important to help people kind of go deep into a topic and really understand what it means. Because again, tweets can be very popular because they're easy to digest, but the reality is hardly easy to digest, right? So it's better to learn the tools that make you more able to understand what's going on around the world, which again goes back to the whole idea of maybe if you rely too much on Gen AI to understand what's going on around you, you're kind of impeding your ability to become smarter and more capable as a person.
For using Gen AI tools in our daily lives and our work, even augmenting some of the writing that we do?
Yep. So, but in a mindful way, right? So instead of using Gen AI as a crutch and as a way to delegate your thinking, I think it's better to use it as a way to refine your thinking. I can give you an example. Right? So again, as I said, I'm not a Luddite. I don't live in a cage or in a cave. Sorry, I have electricity at home. I'm connected to the internet. I work online entire day. I'm not from a rural area where I want to just resist technology. I do write a lot myself. As I said, I write this newsletter, and I use, for instance, a tool that helps me write better. But I do all my writing myself, and then I only use the tool as a way to improve the style. And I go in like suggestion by suggestion. I kind of say, no, this is not the tone I want to use. I want to keep my tone. So I don't just blindly accept it. Sometimes when I'm tired, I see myself kind of falling to the temptation of just blindly accepting those recommendations. But then I said, no, no, wait, this is my style. I want to write in a certain way. There's a reason why I choose those words. But I find those tools extremely helpful because I can't afford an editor. I can't afford someone to read my drafts before I publish them. Right. So I'm kind of using AI as a way to become a better writer. Right. My goal is eventually to not have to use any longer this type of tool because I've internalized most of the good practices. This is one area where I'm totally fine using GenAI tools. And by the way, I tend to prefer very narrowly focused GenAI tools as opposed to the generalist chatbots. Generalist chatbots, I think those are probably the worst cases because they open up so many possibilities, and also they do many things okay, but not a single thing very, very well. Whereas like this grammar tool is focused on doing grammar properly and style properly, so it helps me on that area of my job on my day. And then the other example is I mentioned earlier, right? I just launch is a big term. I opened it up for private beta, which is it's public. So there's a public website. You can go there and can sign up to the waitlist if you want. A tool called CTO Box. I'm not great at naming things, but that's the name that came to mind because it's a toolbox for aspiring or existing CTOs. And I started. Basically, the idea is I'm putting together a set of tools that I felt always lacked when I was running teams myself. And I started with one capability in that suite of tools, which is how to run one-to-ones. Right. I'm quite opinionated on how to do one-to-ones with team members. I'm not dogmatic, I'm opinionated because some people tend to be very dogmatic, right? From my view, for instance, there is no topic that is not allowed in a one-to-one, right? You can always talk about operational topics if that's what's on the mind of the person in front of you, etc., etc. Anyways, digression aside, I built this first capability for managing one-to-ones, and I'm actually using AI in there to help summarize the content of previous meetings and actually suggest follow-up topics, things you need to dig into more deeply, or actions. Right? I think that's a way to make the life of a manager easier by kind of surfacing the information that can be relevant to you, but it doesn't take decisions on your behalf. Where I see the problem with Gen AI is when we delegate decisions completely to AI. Say, no, tell me what I should do and just do blindly, right? Because then again, you're going to lose the ability to think, reflect. I like to use it as a way to surface signal that triggers reflection so that I keep exercising, practicing what makes us human, the dominant species on the planet, even though we're still screwing it up, but we're still the dominant species on the planet.
It's interesting. I also believe that AI should be used as a refinement tool. It's sort of like I see the quality of the content that people are going to produce is what's going to be the differentiator, because everyone has the same access to the Gen AI tools that you have access to, that I have access to. They will be able to offload the thinking to it, which means we'll sort of get this like similar voice of content coming out, and it won't be differentiated enough. And I think the thing that will really resonate is kind of like when, like Web 2 came out and like now the internet was dynamic and you could write content and it was sort of the same prediction. It was the quality of what you put out. So like what makes you unique and the thing that you're talking, your knowledge of the thing that you're talking about unique, right? And so, and that's what makes it interesting because that's a perspective that you have, which I appreciate that you're opinionated about one-on-ones because you have a perspective, likely through the battle scars of doing it and talking with people. And so that, I think that's the thing that wins. And when it comes to one-on-ones, I'm also opinionated. So again, I appreciate that. So I like to build high-performing teams. And like one of the ways that I do that is we all have a shared vision. And that's not just like this is the goal or the target, right? That's like in the trenches, executing together as a team. No problem is not to be discussed because the reason that we're the elite team capable of solving the thing we're trying to solve is because we can solve anything when we have that level of transparency and collaboration on a team. That's, one-on-ones are just a piece of that. And so I agree. Like operations are not off the table, sales, marketing, all the things that it takes for a company to succeed. Those are things that as a whole, and one-on-one we can talk about because there's a plan, right? If you've got your strategy set, there's a plan for how you're going to do that. And then there's probably at least a backup plan rattling around in someone's head somewhere, right? That they can quickly start discussing, implementing if the first plan doesn't work, right? And so that's how you pivot when you're starting out. Anyways, I'll digress from that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. It's a great conversation, and I like the conversations that are not narrowly focused on one area, but they can make connections between different disciplines. That's also something I really like, and I think is one of the things that define myself is that I have quite a broad and eclectic set of like sources of inspiration. I read a lot, mostly not about technology, but also about technology, right? So I work a lot in technology, but I read a lot about like politics, history, and trying to feed myself with information that makes me able to process reality slightly better. But of course, I know I'm wrong most of the time, like everyone on this planet, right? But at least I'm able to be wrong through a process that allows me to learn from those mistakes, and then the next time I might be a bit more right.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the saying, I hold strong opinions loosely. And that's because I love the term you used. I feed my brain with the things that I'm interested in. And I often talk about like my learning process. I think of it as like Googling recursively. So if you Google something, and before Google, when I was in school, I did this in books, the library, right? Whatever I was trying to learn about. But, you Google a thing, you read about it. And when you read about that, you'll understand some of it and there'll be parts of it where you don't understand it. You'll need to do a little bit of additional research. And so then you Google that thing, right? And then you sort of have this like tree of information that you need to go discover and learn to crystallize, this concept that you're trying to understand in your head. That's I like the term feeding my brain because that's exactly what it is, right? It's like I'm feeding my brain with the things that I'm trying to learn about.
Yeah, and you create new connections, right? So the thing is, the hard work that we're all trying to avoid through shortcuts is what creates those brain connections that make you more capable as a person. And going back to the whole analogy with cocaine, if we stop doing that, we're gonna become very, very dumb as individuals.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Sergio, it's been a great conversation. Can you tell us if someone wants to continue the conversation, where can they reach you?
Absolutely. So I think there are two places where I'm the most active. First of all, my newsletter. We're gonna share the link, I guess, with everyone. But there you can comment or just reply to any of the emails you received. I will see them all. Or you can just hook me up on LinkedIn. That's the only social network where I'm really active. I recently signed up to Blue Sky because I don't want to be on X. Just put it this way. But I'm not very active there. It's more like mostly leisure and trying to use it as a source of like inspirational readers and whatnot. I will say newsletter and LinkedIn are the best place to find me.
Awesome. Well, it was great to have you. I enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise, it was great.
Have a good one.
Bye bye.